Hello, I'm Robert, and this is to help people who are scared of these, that the animation industry is threatened by these very, very bizarre videos. So let's just play this one. I'll point out some things I see in it, which is really strange. So I'm like, uh, where's this? Look at this lady. What's her relation to that? She's just gone through that roof, and she's gone through that wall as well. She isn't really physically connected to it. Look at those strange trees. They don't really have branches. Now this is very bizarre. Look at that. I mean, we'll keep seeing it again. Well, look at his left leg. When you see in a minute, his left leg is very, very straight. It's like he's got a limp, but it's not impeding his movement at all. And then, what's all this about? There's some eatery or something there. And let's have a look. Focus on that eatery as we come up to it. And you'll notice how the people in front of them, one walks over to the right, and the other just goes straight into it. And then what are they going to do now? What's all this about? And where are those people going? And the walkway just stops there. And then the way they look, to me, all these people walk. They look as if they're on stilts or something, or miniature stilts. They're kind of floating. They're not attached to the ground. So superficially, if you just look at it a few seconds, it seems to make sense. But then once you just look a little bit closer at it, it doesn't make sense. Now, suppose you are the director of this movie and you want this to be an opening scene of your movie, and you say, well, this doesn't make sense. What are you fools doing? Why have you put an eatery in the middle of this walkway? Get rid of it and make that just a normal walk like any other walkway. You can't do that, because this is just created by a text prompt. And you say, get rid of that man's stiff leg and make that lady relate properly to that wall and to that thing. See how she just sort of walks straight through it as if it wasn't there. And you can't fix any of this. So I don't know why people are making such a fuss of this. Now let's go and look. This is my debunk about it. Let's look at some others. So here, look at these supposed mammoths, and if I just keep it going, now you see they're just sort of floating. It's like all his feet seem to be off the ground at one point. I'm not sure, they're not really quite off the ground. And then look at the snow. If you repeat, they're supposed to walk great clouds of snow being thrown up, but you look and you can see bits of the snow that they've walked over, and it's not got any footprints in it. There's no sign of any indentations in the snow behind that mammoth. And the mammoths, they don't look as if they're attached to the ground. They look as if they're helium balloons to me, especially that one and that one. They're just sort of floating. They're not really attached to the ground. So, and looks at this one, and it's an extremely bizarre one. Wait, let me play it here. Yes. Let's look at this one. Look at his hand. There's kind of its hand. There's kind of a little miniature finger that kind of appears in its hand as it stretches out. See? And the finger starts to grow, and it's just kind of, and then he's got a kind of horn, and then it's got things that look like horns, but they're covered in fur. And then look at its head. Its head isn't attached to its body, it's just kind of floating. It doesn't look as if it's being supported by its body. It looks like a balloon. And now look at the candle. And the candle's just completely straight, like a Bunsen burner. And look, his finger almost goes through the candle. And his head, look what's the head doing? What's the relation of the head to the candle there? It doesn't seem to make much sense. Look, if we just look at this bit, look, at a certain point, part of the horn, finger is in the wrong place for the candle, then head, where is it? Where's the and then if you go and look at the flame is completely vertical, it's not flickering at all. And then if you look, you see this very rapidly melts away for no apparent reason. The lighting is just completely uniform. Then there's lighting down here. Where's that lighting coming from? Presumably it's from the candle, but it doesn't really make much sense. And then the lighting doesn't really fit with that's supposed to be lit up by the glow of the candle, presumably, but it doesn't really work physically. There's obviously it's not ray traced, which is what you would do in a proper scene like this. The lighting doesn't make sense. And then there's it's just like see how it just melts very, very quickly. And as it melts, there's no change in the lighting inside the candle. It just doesn't look realistic at all. It doesn't look like a real candle. I mean, and look at the tail just kind of floating and not really attached to the body. And it just lifts up and down. It's so weird. And it's not just me. Many people are saying they just felt nauseous looking at it. And then let's look at another one. So let's look at, have I got this one. So let's look at this one now. So this one, in a way, it somewhat works better because it's so artificial and it's supposed to be made out of paper. But look, all these fish have exactly, and all these turtles have exactly the same lighting. And look, if I just pause there, every single facet of this seahorse, even though it's meant to be out of paper, but it's all the same shading. There's no sign of any shadow. There's light presumably coming from that direction. Then how isn't there any shadow there? And how, the lighting doesn't make sense. And then, and it's kind of flat, and it's like very flat. Is that supposed to be at an angle with that? If so, how is that supposed to work? And then if you kind of review it from the beginning, and just these fish, they're just all absolutely identical. It's the same thing, every single bit of that fish. There's no variation of lighting. There's nothing. It's not being shadowed by anything, assuming the light does come from somewhere. There's not the slightest sign of ray tracing. And it's so bizarre. They all look. I think that's just a clone of that one. The eye, the face, the actual lighting is just all the exact same lighting. There's no variation in shading, whereas there would be in a real scene. And all these turtles just absolutely identical in the shading, and no sign it's shadowed by anything, or it's just not physically connected to the scene that it's in. And so they say, oh look, it managed to sequence from one shot to another. I just did all that automatically without being told to. But the scenes it's sequencing are very, very, very bizarre. So this is nowhere. This might. It obviously, some people click on it and say, "Wow, we got some Twitter comments saying like that," but most of them just say it's just saying how bizarre it is, and they feel sick and so on. And this looks like trash. Even though I didn't know this AI, it's still super ugly and weird in my opinion. Someone used to do animation. There's so many things wrong with this scene. I didn't do animation, but I have worked with OpenGL to make bouncing balls and various animations for my visual metronome. And I've also made virtual trees and flowers, a software program to make virtual trees and flowers for people. So I've got I'm got a little bit of an eye maybe for those sort of things. I think anyone who's done any work in anything like this, even slightly like me, is just going to find these, well, unless you're kind of panicking or you just haven't got into the nitty-gritty of the craft yet, but it's very, very, very strange things, and there's no way that will do that is any basis for animation. And then we've got these graphics which I use sometimes for, and I find this rather fun. I use them to share people, but they're very bizarre. They're being Copilot, so it's a little bit easier with still things. But look at what's all that holding up like clouds? That's supposed to be a tree. Why are the mushrooms so big, and compared with the trees, which are very small? What are all these curlicue things all about? And how is this bridge supposed to be related to the clouds? It just seems to be hanging in midair with struts that don't really mean anything. All sorts of strange things. Just about all the computer graphics I've seen so far has had these little bizarre things that don't make sense in them. So I don't think it's really prime time for computer graphics, really, not for anything that's at all professional. But maybe at some point we will get AI generated graphics that makes more sense than these ones. So it's not impossible, because we've already had this for music for many years, decade or two now. And last decade or so we've had really pretty convincing virtual orchestras. Now, a musician with a musician's ears is going to listen and is going to say, well, and even someone who does this for a living could say, oh, well, that was that particular virtual orchestra, and they'll recognize which one it is. And they can hear that they're artificial instruments. But the ones that they do nowadays, like for the last few years, if you listen to just a single note, then they actually get musicians to an orchestra, and you get all the musicians for the orchestra one by one to sit in a studio and just play C, C sharp, D, D sharp, E, E, or F, F sharp, and so on, all the way up through the scale, and they do it all the way through the entire range of C cello, and they just pluck each note, and they pluck each note maybe 5 different volumes or something like that. And so then if you hear a single note, then it's actually a plucked note, plucked by an instrument, by a musician. And so a single note can sound quite realistic with these virtual orchestras. And then if you don't listen too intently, then you can have an entire orchestra and all the instruments playing it at once. That can sound quite convincing with these virtual orchestras, and for the general public who are not musicians, may well sound quite reasonable. And you also get some composers who do sound design who really tweak every single note, and they just do a lot of incredibly careful work to make a virtual orchestra sound actually quite realistic. It's a lot of hard work, but it might be easier than actually getting an orchestra to play. But the orchestra, of course, sounds better. But a composer has got a fair bit of time and wants to hear what it's going to sound like, and they can't afford to hire an orchestra, or low budget, some low budget movie or something like that. So you can actually tweak them so they sound really quite realistic these days. And then these virtual orchestras also sometimes, of course, just likes a completely synthetic sound, and that's been going on for decades now. We've had we've had entire what's it called? I can't remember the one, but there've been various even composers who made a thing of it, of producing completely synthetic music, and because it just sounds interesting, but it's very different from acoustic music. And so especially if it's not, you get synthetic music where you've got a synthesizer and someone is playing it. So that's very common nowadays as part of combined with other instruments. And then you get synthetic music where someone's just actually constructed it in a note by note. They've written a score and then they tweaked it, and then they use that as part, and they can use that also mixed in with instrumentalists. So you get all that sort of thing going on, but it tends to be mixed up, and with a little bit of the synthetic stuff used from time to time mixed in with the real stuff. And you still have, for instance, in the best in any sort of reasonable budget video game or movie, like for instance, look at Doctor Who. I happen to be keen on Doctor Who, and the modern series of Doctor Who. In the first, I think it's the first couple of episodes of something, I think they used quite. I think in the first series they used a mix of a fair bit of doing it in the studio with some with the soloists, particularly stands out if it's artificial. So then you'd have live soloists mixed in with a certain amount of orchestra, if I remember right. But then they had much more finance, and so after that they used a full orchestra all the way through. So all the Doctor Who episodes nowadays are played with a full orchestra playing everything that you hear. And it's the same with movies. So that this is Assassin's Creed, which apparently is noted for its music. I'm not an aficionado of video games, but it's got really rather fine music, and it's played by orchestras. So the Ubisoft, who will produce an Assassin's Creed, they employ an orchestra to play the music for their video game. And so the coming of video games has been a massive increase in employment for orchestras. This is an opportunity. If you're an orchestral player, you might get work playing for video games, which is probably quite fun for people like that sort of thing, to be clicking your guitars and strumming away with your and doing tremolo on the strings and all that sort of thing. Some exciting movement in the video game, especially if you're one that you like yourself. You can imagine it'd be quite inspiring for some musicians to do that. So I expect that at some point in the future, maybe, it's very early days yet, and then they're nowhere near it yet. I don't know why people are making such a fuss about it. And then when it comes to voice, so you have quite realistic voices nowadays, but you just don't have the. You probably heard that you can get, like I use voice to read out my documents in Word. And it's really quite reasonable. You would never think it was a real person talking, but it does sound quite convincing as a voice, and it's not wearing on your ears to get it played. And there's better than the built than that. There's quite good programs for text to speech now. It really sounds quite realistic, though you'd never mistake them for a real person talking if you've got an ear for that sort of thing. But they're never going to have actors replaced by synthetic speech. And yet they do use synthetic speech for in some places, like if it's a robot character, if it's Stephen Hawking, or if it's just a robot in a movie and you want it to sound like a robot, then it can be appropriate to use text to speech and just use an automatically generated voice. But it would be a huge amount of work and completely pointless to go through all the work of trying to tweak, like you can do with, I was talking about note by note tweaking of an orchestra, but they wouldn't bother doing that with a soloist because it's just so much work and it still wouldn't sound very convincing. And given that it's much easier with a musical instrument for most people, if you don't play the violin and you hear a violinist soloist, then you're probably not going to particularly notice it's a little bit artificial, as much as nowhere near if you're a violinist yourself. It's just the way things are. It's very obvious for speech because everyone speaks and most people can sing. So if you hear an artificial singer, it's kind of very obvious that it's not a real person. As soon as it's been going for a little while, and they're just not putting the emotion into it that a human being would do. So we still have. We're not going to have pop singers replaced by virtual pop singers. That's not going to happen. I can't see that ever happening. So why are people so worried that you're going to have actors replaced by virtual actors? It doesn't make sense. I can't see that happening in the foreseeable future. Even, decade, 2 decades, 3 decades from now, I just can't see it happening. Because there's nothing there in artificially, like ChatGPT. It doesn't know what anything is. It can't, and for as long as we just don't have any understanding, which we don't have, and impossibility, there's nothing there that knows what anything means. There's nothing there that understands emotions, understands emotional context. They can program in a kind of artificial emotions. You look at Sophia, which can display various emotions. And again, if you've got the kind of wow factor, and you've never seen anything like that, you say, look, there's a robot and it's showing emotions. Wow. this means that we've now got robots that feel emotions. Of course they don't. And it's just, but then once you get used to it, they're incredibly artificial emotions, very limited vocabulary, and it's just not, you're not responding properly. It's just like someone has said, well, if you have such and such a word, then smile or show expression of disgust, and that's, or whatever it is, and that's all it is. It's just responding to key words. It's not like a human being. It's not the way a human being responds. So I see no possibility of actors being replaced, and I don't see any possibility of animators being replaced by the likes of this, because you can't direct these things, and even if you could, there's nothing that understands what anything means. It doesn't even know what a human being is. It doesn't know what a wall is, or what an eatery is, or what a walkway is, and it's going to be very difficult to actually work with that and try and incorporate that in any way into a meaningful idea that you have for an animation or for a movie. So I would be surprised. I think it's going to be a long time, but things can move very quickly. Maybe we can get to something like a virtual orchestra, where it's sometimes used in some scenes in some places, but I can't see if a movie director wanted to have something like that, then they would actually use an actual scene, and then they might use CGI to modify it, to add the snow in, if they or use other effects to modify it in some way. But they're not going to just say to an animation producing program, make me a scene like this, and then start the movie with that. I can't see anyone, except incredibly low budget, or just things to up short reels to upload to TikTok or something. So anyway, that's how I see this. So I'd just stop this.